Hello, everyone. I'm Corey Vandenberg, and I'm joined today by Savannah Kerr. And we are from Clixsy, and we wanted to revisit probably one of our most successful videos that we've done to this point in terms of like feedback and questions and emails and commentary. And that was a video that we did that was a sort of a conversation that we went through, sort of just trying to articulate like what are a lot of the big challenges people are facing and what are the questions that we get on a pretty regular basis. And so we wanted to revisit that, but this time from the perspective of what's changed. And a lot's changed. I think that LSA, local service ads, is constantly being tinkered with by Google. Updates to the algorithm, updates to the policies, and so on. And so there's a lot of new stuff we have to share. And so let's get to it. So when we first did that video, I think we kind of launched from the perspective of what's the biggest complaint?
Yeah, that was the first thing we touched on. Is I asked, like, what do you feel is the complaint that you hear most often?
Yeah. Has it changed?
I would say the general problem is still the same.
Okay.
You know, people still aren't getting the amount of leads they want.
Yeah.
Usually. I mean, if you're coming to us, you're having issues, you're not getting the leads that
So
you
it's
want.
still lead flow. Do you think the cause is still the same?
I don't think so. I think so much has changed that the factors are really different from when we made the previous video.
Yeah.
I know then we talked about everything seemed very sporadic. So performance was just super turbulent. You'd be up here, you'd be down here. I do think it's leveled out a lot. So accounts that are really killing it with implementing the strategies we've suggested, they tend to stay pretty far up there. Accounts who are struggling to implement those strategies tend to have a harder time. Conversely, unfortunately, when you flatline, it can be really challenging to pull you out of it. But when you're at the top, it's hard to bring you back down. So it's a lot more stable in that way. You're not experiencing these insane fluctuations. We're starting to see more regular growth instead of it being all over the map. So, you know, obviously the problem is still, I'm not getting the leads I want, but there's a better path to consistency now.
Okay. So where should we start covering the path?
The path to consistency, I feel like we should probably go over reviews, proximity, because that hasn't changed. Those are still the big three.
Okay.
It's just the factors that contribute to those have changed, and our knowledge of what contributes to those has changed.
So let's start with proximity. When we talk about the factors of LSA in general, keep in mind always that Google, just like its search algorithm, the LSA algorithm is a black box. We don't know precisely how it works. Google doesn't give us a manual to look at. And when they talk about certain things like responsiveness or, you know, the various criteria that they're using to judge an account, like they're not then going in and telling you at a granular level what those things mean. So you're left with just sort of a general sense of where to look, what are the clues, right? And then you got to kind of figure it out from there based on the account's performance. So as it relates to proximity, what are some new things we've learned in the recent months? And I think we should call out when it's something we've learned through observation and testing, or something Google specifically told us, because a lot of people don't know the general support that you can call if you have an account and you just call the phone number. You know, I would say that the level of support you get is lacking.
Yeah, for sure.
At best. And so on account of the fact that we've had so many accounts under management, we're able to get a higher tier of support. We actually have a dedicated rep who can speak to us directly on any given day. We can go and take a look at each account individually with that rep and get back guidance or suggestions and so on. So we'll kind of try to make that distinction of if we say, here's how it works, whether we're talking about something Google said or something we think is the case based on testing.
Mm-hmm.
So what have we learned about proximity?
So when we made the initial video, I think what we really drove home was the 300-mile radius that our Google representative had told us. So at the time, we were asking, how far can you target? How far is too far? And she told us that it was a maximum of 300 miles away. We thought, okay, that's more than doable for almost everyone. So we did talk about how it's a little bit unrealistic that someone 300 miles away would drive to your law firm.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to be a little bit more intentional than that with your targeting. But a big problem that I always see is that people tend to limit themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So something I see time and time again when we take over a new account is that they'll target the city they're in and maybe a couple zip codes surrounding, but they seem to shy away from targeting a larger area. Mm. And I don't think that's anything to be afraid of, because you don't know if someone from a zip code you're targeting did get in a car accident there, but they just happen to be at work in a zip code you're not targeting, and they're looking you up from there, because you're not going to appear now.
That's a great point.
Yeah, so I think personally it's best to look at it more as like creating a bubble. Like when you target on Google Ads, you're able to create that kind of circular radius thing. That's not an option for LSA. You have to input everything manually. But I think it's important to kind of look at it with that same perspective. Like there's a radius of people who are willing to travel to you. Think about how far you'd be willing to travel because you know your area best.
Yeah.
And then set your targeting based on those understandings.
And where might they be outside that bubble? They might be like, they might work in the bubble.
Yeah.
And live just slightly out of it.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, here in Utah, it's not uncommon for people to commute 30, 45 minutes, an hour to work. Mm-hmm. So if you were targeting here, you'd want to make sure you're covering that entire radius because you just don't know where these people are located.
Yeah. So it might seem kind of contrarian to think, at least as it relates to Google's guidance, if they say proximity or radius, how close the searcher is to your location, mm-hmm. that's a ranking factor. I think that's encouraged a lot of people to go out and set up satellite offices, some legitimate, some not, in order to try to have many different locations that are proximal to the searcher. And I think at first that seemed really like an intuitive and novel strategy. But I think it's kind of backfired. And I would almost suggest that you can be more successful, or at least as successful, without it. Would you agree with that?
I absolutely would. Something we've been trying more now is scaling down the amount of counts. So instead of having 2 locations targeting the same city, we just let one take it all over. Mm-hmm. I think it's much easier for the client to manage.
Yeah.
It reduces your risk of overlapping with your other targeting. And I think it just makes it way simpler and more streamlined all the way around.
Yeah. I would say that I think everybody underestimated the importance of responsiveness and reviews.
Absolutely.
Overestimated the importance of proximity.
Absolutely.
And also, I think to that same point, it's easy in your mind. It makes, it seems intuitive to think, well, we'll just open up a lot of locations, mm-hmm. and that'll be great. But what they oftentimes don't think about is every location now needs its own review gathering effort, okay? And that, let's say if you're in a niche like home services, that might be fine. Mm-hmm. You might be able to support 2 locations, 4 locations, whatever, because the transactional nature of it is happening so quickly and there's enough volume there to support getting enough reviews. But if you're a car accident law firm, you might only get a handful of actual settlements in a given month, right? So from start to finish, a case can be 6 months to 2 years. Mm-hmm. And so your opportunities are very diminished. And the minute you dilute your efforts with every new location,
Yep.
right? Because now, let's say you have 5 of them. Well, now you have to figure out, instead of getting 5 reviews a week for one location, you're only getting 1 a week for 5 locations, right? And then obviously juggling all of those, trying to figure. So it's just, I think diluting your efforts is a real risk.
Absolutely. And I think that for like anyone listening to this who is kind of struggling with that concept, like, I poured all this money into this concept, you're telling me it's not going to work. We're able to search from spoofing someone's location. And there's been times where I input a client's exact address of their office, and they're still not in the top 3. Who has a closer proximity than your actual address, and you're still not ranking in the top 3? That's all the evidence you need that you need to direct your efforts elsewhere.
That's a great point. I hadn't even thought of that. Yeah, nice. All right. So what else have we learned about proximity? Anything else?
Yes. We were talking to our Google representative, trying to figure out why some accounts just seem to struggle more than others. Like, where are we going wrong here? We've got our targeting down, everything looks good. And he kept bringing up zip codes, and he would say zip codes specifically. So we were targeting by county, and it was a lot of back and forth trying to understand what exactly he was trying to tell us. These representatives can be super cagey, it feels. But finally we got him to say that he is talking about zip codes specifically. So our team went in, they started adding zip codes to a bunch of these accounts who were struggling. And I mean, it wasn't the magic fix, but it did seem to help.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's important on that note to mention something about the nature of talking to Google support. If you've spent a lot of time dealing with Google support on any product, I don't care if it's Google Ads, G Suite, Gmail, whatever, those who have done it a lot will understand what I mean when I say the right hand doesn't talk to the left, and that you can get 4 different people to give you 4 different answers, right? So what you have to do when you're dealing with Google, any type of Google support, is you have to go to multiple sources, ask multiple times, ask clarifying questions, and then take all the disparate answers and kind of piece the puzzle together, right? So that's a great example, the whole zip code thing, because, correct me if I'm wrong, you're not talking about a single conversation. You're talking about over weeks?
I think weeks is probably the right way to put it.
Yeah. And yet each time you inched closer to the truth, but he was largely kind of saying the same thing.
Yes.
Right? And it's just like it's almost like they don't always answer the question you asked, right? So sometimes they just will say things and you're like, that's not what I asked you.
Absolutely.
Right? And then other times they will say something in a way that is cryptic.
Yes.
Right? And so sometimes you're asking and clarifying and trying to get an answer out of them, and sometimes you're taking what they said and experimenting with the system to see what happens, and then you gain the better understanding of what they meant.
Yes.
Right? I can think of numerous examples of that having happened to us with the targeting, I think is one, with responsiveness, as we were listening to calls and trying to understand, like, what do you mean? Like, they didn't come right out and tell us that there was this 91-day filter, for example, which we'll talk about later, but then upon pressing and pressing. So I think I've probably belabored the point a little too much, but I just wanted you to be aware that when you're hearing us talk about some of these things, a lot of this stuff is hard fought.
Yeah.
Understanding. Okay, so he tells you to look at zip codes specifically. And did he give you general guidance or direct guidance that was really, really specific?
So the way it went down is that we took those accounts that were struggling and we inputted them into our request sheet, which is how we tell him like which accounts are having a hard time. We give him the CID. He's able to go into our account and check them out. And he looked at them and he kept saying more zip codes for every single one. And I was thinking, there's no way we didn't get our targeting right on at least one of these accounts. And I think, I can't remember which one we looked at, but one of them was targeting the entire state. And so I thought, okay, if we're targeting the entire state, and you're still saying zip codes, then do you mean zip codes specifically? And that's when I asked him, like, is it that our targeting is insufficient? You want us to target more? Or do you want us to target specific zip codes
At a
within what we're already
granular level.
talking, or whatever, what we're already targeting?
Yeah.
And that's when he said, yes, like you need to go in and add in zip codes specifically.
Okay. What have you seen since implementing that?
I wouldn't say that would bring an account back from the dead, but I do think it gave a small boost to some of the accounts we have that are struggling. It's difficult to attribute the results because, I mean, obviously when an account starts to struggle, we throw everything we have at it. We're constantly in there checking it every single day, making adjustments, making tweaks. But at this point, we have all of our struggling accounts with, I think it's upwards of 100 zip codes in some areas, more than that. David told you it was like 800? Yeah, so in New York, he added 800 zip codes for one of our clients. Insane. It's definitely time-consuming, labor-intensive.
Hey, do you have time to sit around adding 800 zip codes to your account? Yeah, well, that's what we do.
One by one, because there's no way to mass add them. So we have noticed that it does seem to support the accounts a little better. All those accounts that we've added them to, it does seem to keep them from absolutely flatlining.
So here's an idea. This just kind of came to me just now, so I'm going to try to like put it into words. I feel like there are things we can do to an account that has high impact in a short period of time. There are things we can do that has perhaps high impact but over time. And then I think there's things that might have low impact initially. However, it's kind of the aggregate of all of them together. It's not any one thing. I must think of it like the way a flywheel works, right? That there's these pieces that are all in motion. If they're out of sync, then the whole entire thing goes off, right? But if they're all in sync, then the parts are kind of, the sum is greater than, how does that saying go?
The sum is greater than its parts.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's also one other aspect to this. We may not be able to look at the account and say, boy, that moved the needle. However, there is a certain outcome or instance where we've been able to say that absolutely changed things. And it was this escalation thing. And they won't do it until you've implemented all the things they tell you to do.
Yeah.
Right?
So to give some context to it, we had an account that had been flatlined for, what was it, like 4 to 6 months?
4 to 6, easy, at least.
4 to 6 months, absolutely no calls were coming through. We took it to our Google representative. He said, the usual, add more zip codes, do this, do that. They're just hoops you have to jump through before he's willing to escalate it. Because I'm sure his boss is going to ask him, did you tell him to do this and this? Because this is always the problem. So we got that all taken care of. Nothing changed. We came back to him. We said, it's still not performing. And he said, okay, let me escalate this to my managers. We checked the account a week later. The day that he escalated it, it kicked back to life. It went from having 0 leads in 6 months to having like 40 leads in a single month.
So it was like this administrative magic wand. It's almost like the minute he went to his higher ups, phone starts ringing.
Yes.
So I think that's kind of the point that I wanted to try to make, is that like, if you go add 800 zip codes to your account, or you have us do it, that may not do anything in the moment, or it may have minimal impact. But if you get in this cadence of talking to the rep and having them give us guidance, we implement what they tell us to do. At some point, they will have exhausted their checklists. They'll have gotten to the bottom of everything that they can possibly tell you to go do. My son, he always calls these, like, I guess this is like a gamer thing, like fetch quests. You know, he's like, that's what they're sending us on, is like, go get this thing, bring it back to me.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I feel they treat us sometimes, is that they're just like sort of occupying our attention, like, go do this thing. But once you've sort of done all of them, they'll say, okay, fine, we'll go talk to the boss.
Mm-hmm.
And this has happened more than once, but that was one of the more notable accounts, right?
Yeah, that was the big one, especially because when we asked him after the fact, like, what did your higher up say? What was the problem here? He doesn't have an answer for us. So
That's unbelievable.
really, it was just the magic wand. But I also think that's the benefit of having one Google rep versus having to deal with the support line, is that you have one person who's feeding you this information. So when he gives us the checklist and we check it all off and we come back, there's no chance that someone's going to be like, oh, well, that's not my guidance. That was someone else's. Here's some more hoops to jump through.
You know, and the number of times that I've talked to people who their experience with Google LSA support is, I call the phone number, I eventually get a hold of somebody, and it's usually somebody where there's a big language barrier.
Mm-hmm.
And in addition to the language barrier, if I call in multiple times, I will get multiple answers that all seem disconnected, or, you know, there doesn't seem to be any like congruency. Right?
Yeah, for sure.
And so if that's where you've been, if you've been trying to solve an issue with your account and you keep calling into support, well, I can just tell you right now, it's almost guaranteed you're not going to get to the bottom of the problem through general support. Sad to say. So let's talk about this thing that one time the Google rep said that certain zip codes might have more interest than another. And this is another one of those situations where it was a bit cryptic, and there is a language barrier even with this rep.
Yes.
Right? But I think upon sort of reflecting on it, it reminded me of an aspect of Google Ads, where in a Google Ads campaign, you can tell it to target people who have been or are interested in a given area, right? So this, I think, kind of relates back to what you were talking about with the bubble and people who could be outside the bubble.
Yes.
It's like, imagine a couple of scenarios where this might make sense. Is one, they traveled outside the bubble and then they're in it. And so they're searching, like, let's say somebody lives in Massachusetts, but they traveled to Rhode Island. That's pretty common, right? If they either searched for somebody while they were in Rhode Island, or maybe they had the impression, this doesn't sound entirely outlandish, maybe they had the impression that because the injury or the accident occurred in Rhode Island, that they have to hire a Rhode Island attorney.
Yeah.
Right? But either way, you're now in a situation where Google is going to be trying to interpret what's their intent based on not only what they do put in their search, but also potentially looking at signals from their device. Where was their phone, and where was their GPS, and, you know, what else have they searched prior to that search?
Yeah.
So I think that's yet another vote or testament to the idea that broadening your targeting is probably better than trying to open up a bunch of new locations all over the place.
Yeah, I would say so.
To an extent. I mean, obviously there's limits to this. You know, it might be a little bit case by case, but probably if you're within a singular state or a metro area, then I think that would apply.
Yes, I would say so.
Okay, cool. So we covered proximity. Now let's move to the next major ranking factor, reviews. So I would say first and foremost, I think we have some new ideas and tips and things, but I don't think our general guidance has changed much at all.
I think when we first talked about this in the last video, we said we felt that reviews were the principal metric for generating leads.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a bit more competitive than that now.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely think responsiveness can make or break you
Mm-hmm.
beyond even reviews. It's certainly situational,
Yeah.
but I also think reviews can be incredibly powerful if they were wielded correctly.
Yeah.
It's a toss-up.
It's like that. That's why I like the analogy of a flywheel, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that like if you have very little power behind reviews, but you have great responsiveness, it's like it'll work to an extent, but you could just have so much more if you had them all churning together.
Yeah, I would say responsiveness is the biggest,
Mm-hmm.
just because you can limp along as long as you have a great responsiveness score.
Yeah.
Whereas having a ton of reviews, but you're not answering the phone, they're going to shut you down.
So, and I think to the point you're making, I think it's also instructive to look at the fact that we've learned from the Google reps that there are two different types of timelines that can be imposed as a penalty on your account. One is about 60 days, I think they said specifically 61,
Mm-hmm.
or 91. The longer of the two relates to responsiveness.
Yes. So responsiveness, like if you miss a phone call, that's going to have a bigger ding on your LSA's performance than a negative review would.
Yeah.
You never want a 1-star review. It's not going to help you. It's definitely going to hurt. But if you're really focusing on your responsiveness,
Mm-hmm.
you can kind of get past it.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're going to come back to that idea of being able to sort of push through different algorithmic penalties.
Mm-hmm.
And because we have another theory around that as well. So we'll revisit that idea later in the video. Okay, so we think that responsiveness is now sort of trumping reviews to an extent, or at least it's the more heavily weighted factor at this point.
Yeah, I would say to an extent, just because I feel like the average business owner tends to struggle with reviews way more than anything else.
Yeah.
Like when we start telling them this is what you need to do to answer the phone, they can implement that. They can implement our guidance. But trying to figure out how to generate additional reviews is just proving to be the biggest obstacle.
So a contrarian argument, somebody who would challenge this, or at least maybe it's not a challenge, but it's at least worth talking about, is there's a lot of chatter online about review spam as it relates to LSA. A lot of the big movers and shakers in the digital local space, guys like Mike Blumenthal, Curtis Boyd, a lot of these people who are affiliated with like the local search forum. This is a big topic that everybody's talking about, is that all throughout the local service ads results, you can see listings that are obviously not genuine, or at least aren't genuinely representing all the facts about their location or who they're tied to. And one of the primary ways that they are able to maintain such high visibility is they're effectively just spamming fake reviews. So, you might be saying that, well, what about that? Is that a potential counter to the argument? And I don't think that's the case, because if you look at these accounts that are engaging in that, they understand the value of a lead. They understand the value of a call. And so I would venture to guess, I don't have access to any of the spammers' accounts, but I would venture to guess that their responsiveness is near impeccable, right? Because they're answering everything. They're following up with everything. They have message leads turned on. They have very low time to response rate, right? Like the account or the ad will say typically replies in, and they're all very low. 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes,
Yes.
something of that nature. So I don't think it's a good argument to say, well, you know, this is how they're getting to the top is by spamming reviews. No, it's, again, the flywheel. They're engaging in all the things, and yes, they're unethically getting reviews, and that's helping them in this case, but it isn't because it's trumping that other metric.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think an exception to this new perspective on reviews is the verified reviews in the LSA. So just as sort of a case study, the reason why we started to come up with this theory is because we had a client and they're one of the biggest in the entire state, and they're being outpaced by someone from a tiny, tiny law firm. Like, it's practically a one-man show. They had less than 100 reviews when they were at the very top, and they were the top across the entire state. Yeah, they had less than 100 reviews. They didn't seem to be doing anything particularly special. They hadn't gone through and like super aggressively optimized their account. So I'm searching through it, and the only thing I can find that they're doing that we weren't doing was getting verified reviews from LSA. So I can pull up what this looked like. Okay, so I can pull this closer to you so you can see what I'm talking about. So looking at this, we're talking about this person up here at the very top. You can even see he's got 108 reviews. The people below him, 784. This guy has 5 stars, 198. Still below him.
Yeah.
So you see, like, the difference can't be the years in business. This is 42. This is 47. Can't be the time to message replies. This is 30 minutes. Theirs is a few minutes. The only difference is, and I couldn't get both of them in this screenshot, is that he has 2 Google verified reviews. And now this attorney who's listed here is less than 5 miles from us. And then this attorney here is, what, 10, 20, something like that? Way further away, but he's ranking above someone who's near.
Yeah. So taking into account all the different ranking factors, proximity seems to have little effect, but reviews seems to have a major one. And he has, according to his profile, he does have good responsiveness.
He does, because that replying in 30 minutes,
Yeah.
that's still excellent responsiveness. It may not be as good as the attorney below him, but it's still fantastic.
Yeah. And notwithstanding that he has a 30-minute versus minutes, he's still higher.
Yep.
So some other factor is playing a role.
And I think it's these verified reviews specifically, because that's when an LSA client specifically leaves a review.
Yeah.
There's a way to do that. There's a way to input their information. It'll send them an email asking them, can you leave us a review? And I think that makes the difference, because it tells Google more than a regular review would. It's telling them, like, it's connecting them to the phone number that was used. It was saying, you know, they know for a fact that this person has been in contact with the business at some point.
Yeah. So what would your guidance be about, should people just start, like, doing all verified reviews?
So I would not say so. Just because if you pull back from just an LSA perspective, it would be fabulous for just LSA.
Yeah.
But these LSA reviews still they're not going to transfer over to your GBP. So pulling back from just that super LSA focused perspective, you want to make sure that you're still funneling plenty of your reviews to your GBP. And if you struggle to get reviews, then you should probably be funneling all of them to the GBP. They'll still benefit for you for the LSA. But I would just say for the overall health of your local marketing strategy, you wouldn't want to be focusing the few reviews you have on something that's only going to benefit one aspect. But if you're someone who's getting a lot of reviews, then yeah, like, you know, kick over 1 or 2 a month if you can spare it. Like, I think you will notice the difference if you do.
Yeah. Yeah, so I've often talked about it in terms of budgeting, thinking of it as a budget. So I like, just as a general rule of thumb, 90-10. And just for context, what we mean by this is you need to think of your Google Business Profile or GBP and your LSA as separate but connected entities. Sometimes I just sort of tongue-in-cheek refer to them as like conjoined twins, right? Each one exists independently. However, they share attributes, and that's actually probably a good segue at some point to talk about the other thing we figured out with that. But reviews is one of those shared attributes.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're saying they won't transfer over, there's a connection between LSA and GBP in which reviews left on the Google business profile reflect on the LSA.
Mm-hmm.
They'll show up there. And so those review counts that we see in the screenshots, by and large, come from the Google business profile. However, that pathway doesn't work in reverse. So if you get a review on your LSA, it's not going to come and reflect over on your GBP. It will only ever exist, show up, live on the LSA. And so I think probably the broader consideration is that like reviews matter for a lot of things. They matter obviously for just consumer sentiment and brand research and people looking you up. It matters for your SEO, your visibility there. And so it could become a real problem for somebody to dilute their GBP reviews by overloading them or going all in on LSA. And so you might get a short-term benefit, but in the long run, you'll be harming yourself, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we were talking to a colleague of ours, and in their testing and their data, what they were seeing is that they had observed a better performance on accounts that had a 1-to-1 lead to review ratio,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if they paid for the lead and they got it booked, or whatever, that's the ideal they were shooting for, even though like not every lead is going to turn into revenue. Ideally, they were trying to achieve a 1-to-1 ratio,
Mm-hmm.
and that in their estimation, in their data, that had a correlation to higher performance. So take that with a grain of salt. I don't know if it's true, but it's something that we heard from another agency that manages accounts, and so I think you could certainly aim for that, or at least use it as like a guiding metric, and try to hit that.
Do you think it's feasible to have almost every person who calls into your LSA leave a review? Because we know that they don't all convert.
Yeah, I think it's possible, or at least I think there's a lot of people who don't think creatively enough about leaving reviews. I remember, this is sort of an age-old problem. Like, I'm constantly talking to clients about leaving more reviews, and they're sort of sick of hearing it. Like, yeah, we know, we're trying. But I talked to this one lawyer, and he said something that to me was just so simple but so brilliant. And when I looked at his GBP, he had a lot of reviews, seemingly more than what might be warranted by a single lawyer shop in that industry.
Mm-hmm.
And so I asked, "What's your secret? What are you doing?" And he said, "I'll tell you what I'm doing." He said, when clients call me who either aren't a great fit, maybe they are in my niche, but they're just not a great fit, or alternatively, they just aren't even my client at all. Like,
Mm-hmm.
maybe they need a totally different type of lawyer. He said, "What do you think my competitors do?" And I said, "Oh, I know precisely what they do. I talk to them all the time." Hello, welcome back. In case it looks different, or you're wondering like what happened here, Corey and Savannah have different clothes, or they look different. We actually ran out of storage on the phone that we were shooting with, and so we had to go and get that taken care of, but we're back, and I know exactly where I left off. I was telling you a gripping tale of how to get more reviews, and I believe I ran out of storage at exactly the cliffhanger point of him saying, do you know what my competitors do? And then I said, I know exactly what they do. Okay, so picking up from there. So he's telling me about this process he uses to get more reviews. And in response to his question, I said, I know precisely what they do. And that's because most lawyers, and injury firms in particular, they have this very intense, Glengarry, Glen Ross, coffees for closers type of attitude towards their intake. And to a certain extent, I think there's a place for that. So I'm not hating on those who teach you to treat intake like sales. I think that's a true principle. However, I think there's also a balance that can be struck between qualify them or get them off the phone as fast as possible and having a little bit of humanity and compassion for the person and expressing some empathy and giving them some help. So with that said, that's what I answered his question with, is I said, they're trying to qualify him and get him off the phone as fast as possible. And he said, yeah, you're right. That's what happens. And he said, but here's what I do different. If a call comes in and they are either in my niche but not a prospect for me, or outside my niche, maybe they're looking for a bankruptcy lawyer or whatever, and they don't fit his practice, either way, he says, I spend 3 to 5 minutes, I give them some advice, and they're always very appreciative. And then I say, hey, for taking a few minutes out of my day to give you some advice, would you mind leaving me a review on Google? And he has a 95% uptake rate on that. So 9 out of 10 people go and leave him a review in exchange for 3 to 5 minutes of his time to just guide them on their way, right? And I shared that with others, and on multiple occasions, the answer I get from certain firms is kind of like revulsion and recoil. Mm-hmm. And it's like, oh, you're giving them free legal advice? No, he's helping. He's just trying to be helpful. And as a result, I would venture to bet he has a hell of a lot more reviews than those who have that type of response. So the point of telling that story, I think, isn't to say go do precisely what he does, but it is to say think a little bit more creatively about ways you can get more reviews, because reviews is a currency right now in digital marketing. It affects your SEO, it affects your conversion rates, and it affects the rankings of your LSA. So the answer isn't to bemoan the fact that you need more of them and complain about it. It's to just figure it out. Like, be creative, find ways, because others are, and you're going to be beat by them. Okay, the next aspect of local service ads that we feel has changed somewhat since our original video is the principle of responsiveness. And so you've had a lot of experience lately talking to Clixssy's dedicated Google rep on the LSA support side.
Yes.
You've done some testing with all of our accounts, and you've been able to see firsthand how responsiveness has been affected by certain policy changes, as well as some observed effects. So what are some of the things that you feel are worth noting about responsiveness?
So I think it's worth stating that even now, we don't exactly know how Google defines responsiveness. Okay. The score that we're pulling from the API and we're putting into our dashboards, we still don't know what specific factors make up that score. So what I advise to clients is that instead of just thinking it as, I'm answering a call, think of it as I'm signaling to Google that I'm taking care of the people they send to me. Because that's where the difference in LSA lies. It's not like Google Ads where they're just going to keep sending you and spending up that budget, taking whatever you'll throw at them. They're only going to give you leads if they can trust you to take care of them. And you think about that Google Guaranteed for home services, I think it's like $2,000 or something that they guarantee in case the home services that the client calls falls through or is dissatisfactory. They're not going to back up that claim for just anybody. You have to be on it. And I think that's really what responsiveness boils down to. It boils down to, are you taking care of the people that we send you? So that does include, answering a call in 30 seconds or less with a human, because everybody wants to talk to a person. It means calling back missed callers promptly as well.
Mm-hmm.
It means that when you have your message leads toggled on, you're getting back to them as soon as possible, ideally within 15 minutes, but definitely in under a day. It just means taking care of these leads like they're critical to you, because that's what Google wants to see.
When you talk about calling back a missed call, do you have a best practice or any type of particular protocol people can use for doing that?
So when it comes to our clients, we manage their LSA profile for them, as in the official Google property.
Mm-hmm.
So we leave missed calls in the new tab under there. We don't click into them. We don't check on them, because we want to make sure that our clients, who we advise to download the LSA app, when they open it, we want to make sure that you still see that missed call in bold, so it hasn't been returned yet. So I guess that would be the first thing. We have our clients download that app. Then when there's a missed call, they're expected to go in as soon as they see that notification on their phone. Mm-hmm. And then there'll be a call button in the top right corner when you open up the lead.
Okay.
So you hit that, you'll call back through the app, which is how you signal to Google that you're returning those missed calls.
I think that was a big question I had for a long time.
Yeah.
I remember one of our Google reps on support telling us that calling back a missed call helps the responsive score, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I kept thinking to myself, like, okay, I have as big a tinfoil hat as anybody when it comes to what Google's capable of. But I just could not wrap my head around how they might know if I picked up a phone and called a phone number that I could see on screen.
Mm-hmm.
And our rep wasn't helpful in that regard, because she just simply said, like, yeah, well, that's what we've been told.
Yeah.
Is if you call them back, that helps your response score. And I happened to be watching a YouTube video of somebody who does LSA for home services,
mm-hmm.
plumbers. And they mentioned that, and that was when the light bulb went off for me. It was like, holy crap, that's how Google would know.
Yes.
And that's probably what they were telling us, even though they didn't specify.
Yeah.
And which I think is a very apt metaphor for what it's like to deal with Google. And that's one of the reasons I think a lot of clients appreciate what we do, is just like, we're piecing the puzzle together. Because first of all, you'd have to be the one sitting on hold. Number two, you're not going to get to that second level of support that we're at. And then you're still going to have to do what we've done, which is get a little bit here and a little bit there and talk to 7 or 8 different people until you see the bigger picture and you can kind of piece it and put it together.
Yeah, it's very much the right hand doesn't communicate with the left.
Ever.
And we're left to put all those pieces together. Like going back to the LSA app, we have more knowledge of the app than Google support does. Our clients have called Google support, said this isn't working for me, and then we're able to help guide them through whatever issues they're having beyond what Google support is capable of. That's crazy.
That's wild.
It's crazy.
I agree.
But it's just the way it works. So.
Okay. So calling, leaving them in the new, if they're a missed call.
Yes.
Calling them back on the app. Okay. Are there any like metrics or ways in which you can try to determine if you're doing the right thing or not, and how you're improving or not improving?
I think the best way to tell how you would or would not be improving would be by checking your responsiveness score, which is not possible within Google's native interface. But there are products out there like our dashboard where we can pull from the API and view that ourselves. So that's, I think, really the only way you can tell. You could try and sort of measure it internally by checking how many missed calls you're returning. And
you
just
could do the math if you wanted to.
Theoretically. Mm-hmm. So the interesting thing when it comes to the math is I just talked to our Google rep about this.
Oh.
And he said, you want to make sure you're answering 70% of all your calls. You need to have 70% connected calls / charged leads. That's separate from your responsiveness score is what he told me.
Really?
Yes.
That's a different metric.
Yes. Which I've seen.
Yeah.
Because he once said to me, this account is struggling because they didn't answer over 70% of their calls. And I said, okay, but they have a phone responsiveness score of like 0.75. So.
And he said they're different.
He said they're different.
Wow.
So it's tricky. So if you don't have access to the API, the only real thing you can count on is those missed calls and just calculating it yourself. And, the guidance there, answer over 70%. The best way we measure it here to check if clients are actually going through that process, there's a spot to notate on the missed calls. Just put in, called back. That's all you have to write.
Well, and this is another area where my conspiratorial nature kind of shines. I fully believe Google's using AI to listen to the calls.
Absolutely.
It wouldn't shock me if they're using AI in other respects, such as reading the notes. Why wouldn't they? I feel like that would be a pretty easy thing to do, right? So to the degree that I think they might be, I think it's worthwhile to say things in the notes on the off chance that either AI sees it and incorporates it somehow, or somehow a human auditor sees. But I like to be really explicit and say things in the notes, such as called back, this was a spam call, this was a recorded line, or this was disconnected, or whatever the detail is, just some little nugget to indicate why. And where I've seen that benefit clients is, I don't know if any of what I just said about the AI is true, but I've for sure seen that it affects disputes.
Yes, it does.
There's no question in my mind that when you dispute, someone looks at that, takes that into account, and we've seen dispute approvals go up, which by the way, originally we were under the impression, based on Google's guidance, that getting a dispute declined wasn't that big of a deal, but
it is now.
Really?
Yes.
So tell us more about that.
So I want to say I got confirmation from our Google rep himself. We were talking about the disputes, and he said, you want to make sure you're only disputing leads that you are certain will be approved. So an approved dispute isn't going to do anything to you.
Yeah.
But it sounds like a denied dispute can be a problem. And I even said to him, at one point, it was fine to just dispute. Disputes had no impact on your rankings. And he said, they do now.
Wow.
So and that right there is proof that Google's algorithm changes. The way they calculate your ranking does change. They just don't tell us.
Well, and I think it also illustrates a broader point too, that there's a lot of people out there speculating about LSA, and admittedly, we're one, right? We speculate based off of a lot of observed data and a lot of account access and a lot of conversations with our reps. But nevertheless, we don't have any special access to the black box, right? But I think there's a lot of people speculating who have a lot less of those things than us.
Yes.
And so it's led to some myths. For example, I think a widespread practice is to not dispute on the belief that Google just hates disputing.
Yes.
And I don't agree with that. What would be your take on that?
My take on it is, why would Google hate disputing? Why would they offer it if...
Well, if I'm being devil's advocate, I would say because they just want the money for those leads.
But I think when you think about what Google is as a company, they're all about data.
They're a data company.
Yeah. And disputes help provide them with data. It helps them guide these clients, these customers toward experiences that are more tailored to them. That's what they trade in. That's how their algorithm, at the end of the day, that's what it always boils down to, is the user experience. So disputes help feed that data monster.
I would agree with that.
I don't think you'd be penalized.
So just be judicious about which ones really ought to be disputed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a valid dispute, they would see more as feedback instead of something to penalize you for. Because they don't want to send their callers to you if you don't handle that service. Because it'll lead to less people coming back to that service in the future. If they think to themselves, I typed in that I wanted a divorce attorney and you sent me to an injury attorney, Like, this whole thing is just broken. It's a waste of my time. Never clicking there again.
Yeah, it's frustrating.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Well, I think this is a good segue because the idea that you could be sort of penalized by lots of disputes, any disputes, or illegitimate ones is, I think, sort of a form of a penalty. And so there's a lot of talk about penalties and what can penalize your account, what can't, what will, what won't. So I think it's worth talking about some of those aspects of, like, what do we know for sure is a penalty? But also, something that I think is interesting is we've started to see a lot of evidence that Google is trending towards either incorporating more Google Ads-like features in the LSA dashboard. So taking things like, say, for example, campaign level data, where you can see impressions, clicks, conversions, etc. Taking things like an administrative tab where you can see different settings. We saw this, and we have some screenshots of this when it happened, and as I understand it, it's not there now, but it was.
So where you could see all of those administrative things within the Google LSA interface, it was there for several accounts. It's not there anymore. Like you said, we can still see impressions and such within Google Ads itself, not LSA. But yeah, that whole, like, I'm looking at the screenshot here, you can see campaigns, audiences, keywords and content, change history, goals, tools, all those sorts of things.
Which is all...
Yeah, that's all Google Ads.
Exactly like Google Ads, yeah.
But it was buried within the LSA interface.
Which I think, I mean, again, clearly letting you know that I'm speculating here. But I think that that's probably an instance where you're seeing their future plans, and they didn't realize that whatever they're testing on the back end was going to become accessible.
Yes.
Right? They probably had no intentions of anybody seeing that, and it probably just somehow became enabled.
I would say so, because a lot of those links I went to were broken.
Yeah, and they didn't work, or they were like, and it was like you could click on stuff, but it did nothing.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So I find that fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially because I've mentioned this in a couple of other videos, but back in November, there was an update to the API for Google Ads where they listed local service campaigns. And I believe this is actually still there, so you can go check it if you want to. In the API documentation, local service campaigns is now a subsection, which I feel like the addition of that kind of gives us a clue of where they're headed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, that I feel like could take one of two forms. It could mean LSA moves over and becomes part of the product suite of Google Ads. I feel like that would make a lot of sense. It would be more integrated to have it be vertically aligned with Google Ads instead of this sort of enigmatic thing floating out on its own. Or, Google oftentimes doesn't do what I feel like would be the logical thing. And maybe what they do is continue that trend of just sort of clawing certain aspects of Google Ads over into LSA, and they keep them separate. But one of those two things I think is on the horizon.
Yeah. Well, I think you've been saying for a while that, LSA isn't going anywhere.
No, I don't think so.
It seems to be continually improving. It doesn't seem like they've given up on it in the slightest. And I would imagine they're fairly satisfied with the product, considering how satisfied some of our clients are.
I'd be more surprised that it goes away than I would to see them figure out how to do even more lead gen within the Google Ads suite.
Yeah.
Right? Like, because I know at times they've tested various types of Google Ads campaigns that are an acquisition-based model, right? Like acquiring a lead or a qualified lead. So I could absolutely see them doing that because they've tested it in the past, and then they have LSA, which is a successful product. So, but I I think it's worth pointing out that part of one of those things that they've brought over and incorporated from Google Ads is visible and is working, and there's now a place you can check to see if you've violated policies.
Yes. So that is a new tab that they have. It is imperfect, I would say. So something we've struggled with when it comes to LSA for a long time is that things will get randomly invalidated. Like for attorneys, you have to have a headshot. When you look at the main screen, it'll show all checks are passed. When you click into the headshot tab, you'll see that your headshot was rejected for whatever reason. And I mean, we just had a client yesterday where he'd had his headshot up for months, and then yesterday it just popped up invalid. And it was a stroke of luck that we even found it. There's other things like, if you run HVAC ads and your license expires, you'll see under that policy violations tab that you need to reinstate your license or your insurance or whatever it might be. So some of the bigger things you can see there, but at the same time, I've also seen attorneys' bar licenses just seem to evaporate, and it doesn't give you a notification for that.
Yeah.
So it's very much an imperfect product, but it does seem like a step in the right direction. I mean, they're not going to start telling you less, I don't think. Hopefully they get better and better about detecting these issues within their system so that we have more options to help us handle it. But it'll also tell you things about billing. Really what it is, it's no different from the account management section we have within our manager account for LSA. So it just gives us a long list of like billing needs updating here, like we check every day, make sure everything's above board. It's that same information. Yeah. So it's not giving you anything too high level when it comes to these account penalties, but like they're not going to tell you you're in trouble for a missed call.
I feel like the LSA, there's definitely certain aspects of it where we have specialized knowledge, but I also think to a certain extent the benefit we provide is that it's sort of like a little bit of a death by 1,000 paper cuts type of product.
Yes, it is.
It's like all the little things that you're like, yeah, I could do that. It's just 5 minutes to go check these every single day. And another 5 minutes to just go move the leads through the boxes. And, it's just another 5 minutes to go listen to the calls and add some notes. And it's like it all adds up.
Yeah.
And something so simple can turn into just, a lot of work.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems very straightforward at first glance, LSA does, and I don't think many people realize how complex it is until it starts going wrong.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think they get a false sense of hope sometimes because it's been stated and proven by numerous sources that in the beginning you get a boost.
Absolutely you do.
Right? And so it's sort of like a sugar high in a sense. And people have a tendency to get false confidence from that. It's like, we're riding this initial wave. And I think probably the single most common thing we hear is it used to work and now it doesn't.
Yep. Yeah, I think that first period, you have to think of it as an audition. When those calls start rolling in, you need to think this is a test. They are testing how well I can handle the calls that they're giving me. And you need to be on your A game when those first calls come rolling in. You need to be responding to missed calls immediately within the app. You need to be, if you have message leads on, you need to be responding to those message leads. It should be really all hands on deck in your intake during that time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I like that idea. Treat it like an audition. That's absolutely right.
I think a lot of people who struggle with their LSA are tempted to give up on it. They're tempted to say, these are junk leads. They're not really productive for me, or I'm having a horrible time with this. I'm investing too much time and energy to try and maintain it. Where we've talked about the future of LSA and how this is a service that's likely going to expand instead of shut down. I think if you pull yourself out of the game and you say, this is too much work for me and I don't care enough about the leads, I'm out, you are just increasing the knowledge gap for when LSA becomes an absolute must for running any sort of ads.
That's a great point. Yeah, and I think the gap will widen in terms of you and your competition.
Absolutely. I mean, even just looking at what we know now versus a year ago, there is a lot to learn about this service.
Yeah.
And the big guys who can afford to just keep throwing money at it will continue to do so.
Right.
So it's one of those things I think you just have to stick in it.
I couldn't agree more. Are there any particulars on responsiveness as it relates to maybe like message leads or calls or anything like that that is worth pointing out?
Well, we've talked about calling back within the app. Something else I think the app is really helpful in managing is message leads.
Mm-hmm.
So within every account, home services, whatever, there's an option to toggle on message leads. So the client will input their name, their case type, I think zip code or something along those lines, email if they want to be contacted via email, and they'll send you just a brief message about what they're experiencing. So if it's AC, it's going to be about AC. If you're a personal injury attorney, maybe they tell you, I slipped and fell, this, and this.
Yeah.
So you have to respond to those message leads promptly in order to signal your responsiveness to Google. So if you're just running everything on the desktop, you'll never get a notification that it happened. If you have that app, it'll pop up on the phone, on your phone, and say, you have a new message lead. You can go in there. It's just like sending a text message back. You type it in, you send it out.
So it's a text notification or a push notification?
It's a push notification that takes you to the LSA app.
Okay.
But within that, it's just sort of like any other messaging platform.
Mm.
What's interesting when it comes to message leads is for a long time we were advising against them because if you do not respond, or it said if you don't respond in 24 hours or less, they'll revoke the feature from your account altogether.
Mm.
So that put a lot of pressure on our clients, especially if they didn't have the capacity to handle those message leads, to the point where we just sort of advised against doing it at all. But now I think it helps make you appear more accessible. Because I think to myself, if I'm scrolling through a list of ads and I just see all these, call or go to website, and then it says call, message, or go to website,
Mm-hmm.
and it says they'll get back to me in 5 minutes or less, I mean, that would catch my eye as a customer.
Well, and elaborate on that a little bit. The ad itself will display to anybody else searching in the future how quickly you typically get back.
Yeah, well, so I've seen all across the spectrum. I've seen down to a few minutes is what they'll say. 5 minutes, 15,
Mm-hmm.
several hours, more than a day. I've seen that too. It's really similar to what Facebook does, where they just see how quickly you're responding to your messages that you get,
Mm-hmm.
and they'll put that on your profile and say, this person responds in such and such amount of time. But I think it's interesting in regards to LSA because they add that to the main ad itself. It's not something a client has to click into. It's visible just like the name of your company and the amount of stars you have.
Yeah, so that's like a double whammy because on the one hand, maybe there is some algorithmic penalty or sort of throttling that occurs
Mm-hmm.
on how fast you respond. But there's also an external effect of what are people going to think about you if they're seeing that you typically respond in 10 hours,
Yeah.
right? And then how many people are going to actually engage with your ad? So you gotta be on your game.
Yeah, I was talking to David in our LSA department, and he was asking me, if I see that our clients aren't responding to these message leads, should I message them back?
Mm.
And I said, if you catch it, maybe drop something like, thank you so much for getting a hold of us. You can call us at this phone number, just to signal to Google, like, hey, we hit it back.
Yeah.
But I told him, I said, I don't think we're really saving anybody any leads. I think if you're messaging somebody, you're expecting a pretty quick response. And if you're not responding until 7 hours later,
Yeah.
they've already found an attorney who will.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I'm that way. And I think that's one of the best ways to evaluate anything when you're thinking, like, how should I do this?
Mm-hmm.
How would you want it done if it was you,
Yeah.
right? If you text a company or you met, and let's be honest, it's messaging for you on your end.
Mm-hmm.
It's texting for
For
them,
them, yes.
right? So if you're texting somebody, you're hoping to get a fairly rapid response.
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
So it's been a big complaint, right? Like
Yes.
a lot of these companies, and admittedly, I think part of the hesitancy was on our part.
Mm-hmm.
They would want to turn it on and we would be like, yeah, no, you shouldn't. Because we knew that it was inevitable what they're going to do is shoot themselves in the foot.
Mm-hmm.
But we've since been doing it because that's what we do. We're always exploring for clients like new technology, new solutions, new strategies. And yeah, we now have a way that you can leave your message leads on 24/7
Mm-hmm.
and never worry that you've missed one, that you will miss one.
Yeah.
So we can ensure not only a 100% response rate, but also a quick, almost immediate, so that your ad on the front end will start saying typically replies in minutes.
Yeah. And I think that's huge. I think that would make all the difference in the world. You'd really just be hitting every box that Google wants you to check at that point.
What about calls? What do you advise there as far as like after hours and stuff?
After hours, we usually tell clients, well, like you said, we've been advising them, if you don't love your intake team, your after hours intake team, then let's just set your ad to business hours. Let's make sure the receptionists you have in-house who you've trained are the ones answering your calls. I've just seen too many people sit on hold for a long time, or customers have frustrating experiences when I listen to these calls. So we usually recommend that they just stay within business hours if that's the case. If they really love their intake team, we'll set it to like a 24/7 schedule.
Mm-hmm.
But that also begs the question of message leads. I think that's what makes our tool that we have so incredible, is that it can actually go in and handle those message leads, because most intake companies can't access your LSA to manage those message leads for you. So it's a bit unfortunate. So something I really want to touch on, I don't know quite where it fits anywhere else in this video, but I feel like it's important to say. We've gone to a lot of conferences this past year. I've talked to a lot of people who've expressed frustration with their LSA, and I tend to hear one thing in particular, which is that around July to December of 2022, their account took a nosedive. And nobody can explain why. And they all think that it must be them. There's something that they must have done that tanked their account.
I've seen it not just, so you've seen it a lot with our clients. I follow this topic on Twitter. I talk to a lot of the other big local marketing, like influencers, you know, like a Mike Blumenthal, and let me rephrase, I don't talk to Mike. He doesn't have a clue who I am. But I follow the topics, I listen, I read their articles. Sterling Sky, Joy Hawkins, you know, Len, I can't think of Len's last name, but he's from North Carolina, and he does a lot with LSAs. And all of them are talking about this exact thing, that right around end of third quarter, first of fourth quarter last year, unexplainably, even good standing accounts took nosedives. Yeah.
So, you know, it's something that our clients universally experienced. Well, I don't even want to say universally, because people with huge brand names didn't seem to take a hit at all. They seemed to stay right on top. But anyone else who had sort of started rising to the top with LSA just completely flatlined. And it was hard not to take it as, is this a reflection of our work? Did we do something? But then as we went to these conferences, as you were looking at these articles, we were talking about it, we realized it was a much more universal problem. It is probably more indicative of an LSA algorithm as a whole. And unfortunately, just because we're about a year out from it hitting, doesn't mean everything's gone back to normal. There are people who flatlined around that time who have not rebounded. Because I think it's more about adapting to the changes that were implemented and starting to fight your way back up those rankings.
Yeah, I think it's not all that dissimilar to SEO in that sense. That, like, there probably will be more of those future changes where you're going to be sort of in the dark and you got to feel your way through it and figure out what changed. Yeah, that's a good point. And I think, noticing that the big brands didn't see as much of a downturn is an interesting point. It's led me to believe that there is some aspect of the LSA algorithm that is either looks favorably upon or takes into account top of what we call top of funnel, which is brand presence or share of voice. There's a lot of different ways that people describe it, but it's how often are you being sought out by the public, right? By name. How often are people saying, Morgan and Morgan as an example, because they're one of the biggest. Mike Morse law firm, who's one of our clients, Richard Harris in Las Vegas, Selena Law. If people are looking for you by name, those accounts seemingly just were like Teflon, despite the downturn we saw with everybody else. I don't know how else to explain it.
Yeah, I think it's just, like you said, that brand awareness. Because when they would look up injury lawyers, they're going to scroll through. They're going to see, oh, Mike Morris, I know that guy. And they're going to click on his ad. And I think that really helped carry them through that nosedive that occurred. They still had those opportunities to audition for Google, whereas a smaller brand isn't going to get that almost free click, you could call it.
Well, and what I was going to say is I've seen it not just with this perceived algorithm update, but also with things that ought to be regarded as penalties, such as getting a negative review.
Yep.
These bigger accounts where they have a lot of brand recognition don't seem to be as diminished by a negative review or a missed call or whatever. They seem to breeze through those.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, last but not least, this is one of my absolute favorite topics, something I just kind of couldn't wait to talk about, and that is tools to be able to check the rankings of your LSA.
Yeah, so they're pretty brand new. They're definitely still in their beta periods. I want to say there's only 1 or 2 on the market or something like that.
That I'm aware of.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of others. And so effectively what you can do is you can kind of check by keyword and by zip code. Where do you rank? Where do you show up? And in my experience, as I've shared this with a very select few individuals, the thing that everybody else wants to know more than their own ranking, it's like, what do my competitors rank?
Yeah.
Like, tell me what they're up to, right? And so you can do both. You can see where you rank, and you can check in on your competitors and see, like, how are you guys comparing? And by the way, it's an average rank, so it's checking on a pretty regular, consistent basis, over time, and then compiling those results. So you might rank number 1 one time, number 3 another time, but number 14, and that's going to affect your average, right? Because it's checking periodically throughout the day. So there's some really cool, super cool advancements. And later on in the video, I'm going to tell you about what's coming next for Clixsy. We're going to be writing a book. We're going to be doing a little bonus for that. And in addition to that, going and signing up to get notified about the book could be a great way for you to find out more about this tool when it becomes available.
That would be interesting.
Oh, yeah. And maybe show a teaser of what those results look like, just to give you an idea. But look for that, and every person I've mentioned it to is just absolutely salivating at being able to see that. So I just wanted to give you a little tease that that's something we're working on, and it's on its way. Well, I hope this has been helpful. I hope you've gained some new insights from our last call. And if you have questions, as always, feel free to comment below or get a hold of us directly. We're very easy to talk to and friendly. And if you get one of us, I think you'll get some really great answers. If you get my business partner, Will, you'll get some wacky ones. And I think that we can be of help if you're having problems. And because we love this stuff so much, because we eat, sleep, and drink LSA all the time, we decided to write a book about it. And
yes, we did. It's about August that we're anticipating that it'll be released. It's coming along really, really nicely. We're really excited to put it out there. Kind of feels like one of the first culminations of everything we've learned. It's the first, probably won't be the last.
Yeah.
But we're super excited about it.
I'm not aware of another LSA book. Like, I know that there's one who wrote a book, somebody on Amazon wrote a book about, like, what did they call them? Google local ads or something like that. But I think they were talking more about the Google ads version of local ads. So
yes.
So I think we might be the first ones. But
I've looked and I haven't been able to find anyone else with an LSA book. So I think this really might be the first one in the market, which is super cool.
I'm excited about it. So what we're going to do is we're going to make it so that if you're interested in getting this as soon as it's available, We're going to make a link where you can be notified. And I promise that's all it's going to be for. You're not going to get spammed or a bunch of junk stuff. But if you want to get on that early notification list, we'll have a link in the description of the video that you can go to. And as an additional bonus for signing up to get notified about our book when it comes out, Savannah has graciously volunteered to do a complimentary audit walkthrough for them that you'll get. Is it going to be like a recorded video?
Yes, so I'll be recording a video, going through a demo LSA account. I'll guide you through all the different tabs. I'll explain to you what they mean. I'll tell you what to look for. You know, we talked about those spontaneous invalidations. I'll tell you where they appear and how to find them. I'll guide you through the LSA dashboard interface. I'll help you look at your reporting, show you the best ways to optimize your business profile and budget section. It'll be very comprehensive. I think you'll probably walk away learning a lot.
Yeah, it's something that we normally charge for. So I think it's a ton of value. You'll be able to go back and watch it over and over and over and slow it down, check on any particular section that didn't make sense, and it would be really helpful. So look for the link in the description of the video below, and you'll be able to go there. Just simply exchange your email address. Just give us that, and we'll let you know about the book when it's ready, and we'll give you that free complimentary video walkthrough of an LSA account.